Welcome to all of you who has joined this Inspireurope webinar on funding of researchers at risk to join the host organization. We have 1 hour to go through this topic. This is a webinar, which means that only the panelists speaking in the webinar are visible to you. All others are without camera and muted. You all have possibilities to ask questions. If you want to ask questions, you have to write them in the Q&A section. You can see this normally at the bottom of your screen. And we will answer most of the questions at the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. I can also mention that in part of the webinar, we will have all the speakers up on the screen, and in part of it, we will share screen. You can individually choose if you want to have speaker view, where you see only the one speaking. If you want a gallery view, where you can see all the posts. This you can choose in the top right corner of the screen. I can mention that the target group of this webinar is mainly employers and host institutions. So the Inspireurope project is Horizon 2020 project under the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions. It's an initiative to support and promote and integrate researchers at risk in Europe. The speakers in this webinar is myself. My name is Marit Egner. I'm from the University of Oslo, and I'm the Scholars at Risk contact person at my university and has experience with receiving scholars at risk at the university. I'm also in charge of the work package on preparing the work environment in the Inspireurope project. Then we will hear from Karen-Lise Scheie Knudsen from the University of Agder. She's institutional contact person for Scholars at Risk. She has been involved with the academic dugnad for refugees at her university, but she's also the chair of Scholars at Risk Norway. So she will share her experience. Professor Terence Karen is a professor of higher education at the University of Lincoln, and he's very well known for his research on academic freedom. And he has experience with using the Marie Skłodowska-Curie individual fellowships for receiving scholars. Dr. Stefan Rommel is head of academic relations at the Free University of Berlin, and he will talk about experiences with both external and internal funding. And Sofia Klingberg is Inclusion and Diversity Manager at AFRI in Sweden, which is a private engineering company, and she will talk about how private companies can also work with integrating researchers. They have worked primarily with engineering though. The topics will be starting off how we can search for funding, then recruiting through the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, pros and cons of seeking external funding, then the private sector recruitment. And then we will have a good portion of time at the end for questions and answers. So I just want to give you a little bit of vocabulary. Researcher here means a person who is doing research activities. It can be from PhD level and up to a full professor. Being at risk means that you are either at risk in your home country or that you are seeking refuge, mainly now in Europe. And you can either have refugee status or come directly from your home country. And then host organization means any institution or business welcoming researchers at risk to the organization. It can be through employment, fellowship, and internship, and we will hear about these different possibilities in the webinar. And then I just wanted to mention that there are a number of funding programs. We have listed them here. You will receive the presentation afterwards, and the webinar is recorded, so you can go back to this list later on, but you can see here that there are different programs in different countries, and there is also opportunities that are national, not specifically for researchers. Now I want to go on to hear about the different experiences from our speakers, and the first one will be Karen Knudsen. Please, the floor is yours.
Let's see. I'm unmuted, yes. Okay, hello everyone. I will be speaking in two capacities today. Like Marit said, I'm the primary representative for my university, University of Agder in Norway. And I'm also the Scholar at Risk Norway chair. When we started Scholars at Risk Norway back in 2011, only one institution in Norway, University of Oslo, had hosted a scholar over their own budget. And when we slowly were expanding the number of hosts in Norway, I think no one thought of any other way of doing it. And for my own institution, University of Agder, also called UIA, we had joined SAR in 2010. And after a year, I and the local SAR group, we addressed the university board, asking for a pilot hosting, which they agreed to. And then we received a scholar from Syria. And when that hosting went well, we went back to the board, hoping for permanent funding. And they agreed to fund one scholar every other year, then one scholar every year, and now we have 2 scholars every year. The last expansion was suggested by the student members of the university board, so that can be a fruitful alliance. We realized when we looked abroad and interacted with other sections that it is quite uncommon that the institutions fund the placements themselves. I think I will have to add that Norwegian higher education institutions are mostly state-owned and state-funded, and even private institutions have funding from the state. We are probably in a better economic position than many. Like for my institution, more than 80% of our budget is national funding. And even if the ministry wants the universities to secure more external funding, it is still a small portion of the university budgets. We, as in the steering committee of SAR Norway, we realized early on that smaller institutions found it hard to finance position for SAR scholars. So we started looking for funding elsewhere. At one point, we applied to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a funding of national scholarships plus a secretariat. That didn't work out. Instead, they funded a Students at Risk program that we also had been supporting. So that was at least something. We have also experienced that it is a lot easier to secure funding for events. Institutions like UNESCO, Fritt Ord in Norway, and also the ministries have been quite willing to support events. But events are, of course, time-consuming, and the running of the Norwegian section is still done without funding, except for the small annual fee that every member pays to, to cover direct expenses. That is until this year, because in 2019 we started looking for funding again and applied to the Ministry of Education this time. And they gave us approximately 130,000 euros for this year, including one scholarship and some administrative support. This is, of course, an odd year for all of us, and we might need to ask permission to push some of that funding over to 2021, when the borders hopefully will be open again. We also hope that this will be an annual allowance, since part of it was included in the national budget. I will also add a few words about working with refugees. Like Marit said, the universities in Norway joined forces and got together in 2016 in what we called academic dugnad, and have, among other things, offered information, language training, internships for refugees with an academic background or academic motivations. We work closely with the local offices of the Norwegian Labour and Welfare Administration, called NAV. At my university, we have had some interns paid by NAV during these years, and we managed to get one of them into a PhD program funded by the university. We now see more and more of these refugees entering universities. And at the University of Agder, we are offering language training and courses in academic writing to this particular group. And this August, one person with a refugee background, he entered Norway as a refugee. He will join us as a scholar through SAR. So in this case, the two initiatives merge, so to speak. SAR Norway will continue to look for other sources of financial aid. We have started looking at foundations and other private donors. Being in the public sector, we are unfamiliar dealing with donors, and it's still a bit new to us, but we are hopefully learning, and time will show if we succeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. This was interesting to hear about. And now we will hear about some other experience of getting external funding. We will hear from Terence Karen, who has got the Marie Sklodowska-Curie Action funding for receiving PhD candidates.
Well, firstly, I'd like to thank the Inspire team for the invitation, which I much appreciate. And also the Scholars at Risk team, with whom I've been involved for quite some years now. Now, my own presentation actually addresses how European Union funding was used to support two scholars to come to the United Kingdom. Firstly, from Germany, and secondly, from Ghana, to study academic freedom. Now, although they came to study academic freedom and they were not at risk, nevertheless, the same funds could be used for scholars from any other nation state to study any subject, as I will show you shortly. Next slide, please. So in terms of the context, I had already done quite a lot of work into academic freedom in Europe by myself when I was working in Mexico. And this had produced various academic papers in well-ranked academic journals themselves. And actually it had a big impact insofar as it changed the law on academic freedom in Denmark. Having said that, it was getting to the stage where I thought I needed more resources to try and move the research forward. And so I started looking for grants to do this. Next slide, please. So the main problem I had with respect to the United Kingdom was that it proved pretty much impossible to get grants from the United Kingdom research institutions to actually study this type of research. One of the reasons is that higher education research in the United Kingdom has altered, and it's moved away from funding blue skies research towards applied research, so that all research in the United Kingdom now has to show impact, preferably financial impact, and academic freedom research just doesn't create any fiscal impact. Next slide, please. So, after looking through various sources of EU funding, it was decided to make a bid for EU funding under the Marie Sklodowska-Curie Action, which offers two types of individual fellowships. Firstly, there are European fellowships, which are for people within Europe to move across Europe, and these last up to 2 years. And then there are international global fellowships, as they're now known. And These cover all countries for up to 3 years. So these type of grants are available for all stages of a researcher's career. Because of this, we decided that we would make 2 applications. Next slide, please. The Marie Curie Action Fellows come from a wide range of disciplines, from physics to linguistics, as I've said here. European fellowships are for researchers moving into Europe, and they have no limits in terms of the subject domain. The only thing one can say is that all applicants must have a PhD before they start, and all fellowships must involve the research fellows in gaining some kind of new knowledge or skills to enable them to progress their career. Finally, all fellowships have to demonstrate some kind of benefit to the European research area. It doesn't matter how you do this, but you need to show that it's going to help the European research area. Next slide, please. This slide shows the types of subjects chosen by previous fellows. Now, as you can see, they cover a wide range of topics. There's no limit to the choice of subjects, and you can apply as often as you want. In addition, there's no kind of rationing system, so all nations and subjects get treated the same. The main criteria for selection is the level of the excellence of the grant application. All applications are scored out of 100, and very useful feedback is given. However, typically an application would need to score 90% or above to stand a chance of getting funding. So it's a pretty high bar you've got to pass. Next slide, please. So the first project was about building academic freedom and democracy in Africa. And as you can see here, this allowed Dr. Kwajo Apejeya Atua from the University of Ghana to come to the University of Lincoln to study academic freedom in the African states. And the project was really around gaining legal and constitutional information to assess the de jure levels of protection, but also to look at the de facto levels of protection by creating an online survey. This particular application scored 92.4 out of 100 and was worth 278,000 euros, and it ran for 3 years. So it was quite a big project. Next slide, please. The SAVE project was slightly different. This had a European focus, and the applicant was a man called Dr. Klaus Beiter from the Max Planck Institute in Munich. Having said that, the project had a similar focus, the idea of creating an online survey to gather information about the de facto state of academic freedom in the European states. The idea would be that we combine this with the de jure information to create a template for a global measure. So it was similar to the previous project, but not identical. Next slide, please. So in terms of the research outcome, we had to demonstrate that both the fellowships were given additional skills. Now, in this instance, both the fellows were legal scholars, and they had to be trained in quantitative research, survey construction, and social statistics in order to use an online survey and analyze the results. And I, in fact, provided the training for them. Both of the fellows managed to get publications out of this research and conference papers and other things, and both managed to enhance their CVs and advance their career through publications or promotions. The research continues to generate further publications, and the work on academic freedom in Europe prompted the Council of Europe, for example, to consider a new protocol for academic freedom. So it is having a big impact above and beyond the project itself, and this is helping the scholars to gain career progression as they move on. Next slide, please. Now, there's no reason why scholars who've been identified as being at risk cannot apply for a Marie Curie fellowship. Having said that, the applications take a great deal of time and effort to complete. But with assistance from SAR and also partner institutions, it would be possible to put together a program whereby scholars at risk were habitually given assistance in order to complete Marie Curie fellowship applications. You know, I'd be very willing to show people copies of my original applications themselves. Next slide, please. The fellowships are in fact very, very generous, as I've indicated, but they include funding not only for academic activities like going to conferences, but also for housing, subsistence, travel backwards and forwards. And in addition, the grant is enough to for scholars to bring their family with them, which may be very, very important where you have a scholar at risk. So Kwajo, for example, brought his sons with him from Ghana. And in that sense, they went to school in Lincoln. So the impact of the grant extended beyond the fellowships. The fellowships are dedicated to research and do not impose any teaching duties, which means that scholars should be able to get stuff published. For many scholars, these fellowships are a good way for a scholar at risk to establish a new career in a European nation state. Next slide, please. Here we have the final date for the next applications, which is the 9th of September 2020. And we're now nearly in June. That would give you quite a few months to put together an application if you want to. And here I've also given you the website where the information relating to the Marie Curie actions is freely available. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for listening. If you need any further support from me with respect to Marie Curie, please just email me at the email address you see on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terence. I think this is useful for both institutions and scholar researchers to know about. I would just say that we have had a separate webinar where we got explanation from the Commission about how these fellowships work for researchers at risk. This one can be found at the resources section of the Inspire Europe web page as well. Now we will turn to Stefan Rummel, who will tell us a bit about the experiences from your university, Freie University Berlin, and how you have been using both external and internal funding, I think. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marit and colleagues. Yes, I have the interesting title of Pros and Cons of Seeking External Funding. Of course, one would ask oneself, what's wrong with getting external funding, because all the universities usually are short of funding, and so if you get something from a third party, it's usually a very good thing. However, our example shows that there is very well something like too much of a good thing. If you look at the history of Freie Universität and its scholars at risk activities, I may also share that I'm working in the international office in charge of academic relations, which means I take care of our guest researchers. And when we started to work with scholars at risk, which was in 2011, we first set aside a quite substantial amount of money, €500,000 to help and assist scholars at risk, and also to spread the idea of having a German chapter of scholars at risk in Germany. And our first scholar at risk we received in 2013 in February, and then there came others, and of course then 2015 there was the big Syrian refugee crisis, and many other actors came into the fray and also supported scholars, hosted scholars. And then 2016, of course, the PSI program from Humboldt Foundation was launched, which made it very easy for universities to accept scholars because it was fully funded by third parties. And in 2018, that's the Berlin specialty, the Berlin Senate laid a new program open, which was altogether €3 million and was restricted to the 4 universities in Berlin. So there's quite a lot of money sloshing around here actually in Germany, and it's a good thing. Somehow it reminds me of today's Corona crisis, when there's a 500 billion package discussed in the European Union now, and there are some states not happy with it, the other think it's a great thing. So in these years, in the mid of the 2015-16, there was much readiness to help and to do something, and so the funds were just really sloshing in. We had a program for called Welcome for students from Syria and other countries of the Middle East who came to Germany and who were enabled to continue their studies here. We had now a program called Academics in Solidarity, which is from the Ministry of Education and Research in Germany, here at Freie Universität, which helps scholars to adapt to the market here in Germany and Europe by training them actually in academic works and other things. This is 600,000 euros. We have also here at Freie Universität, we have a program which is called Academy in Exile, which is for up to 10 Turkish fellows every year, which is 1.5 million euros, or rather dollars, US dollars, which is funded from US donors. And we have this part of the 3 million from Einstein. So it's very, very much money. We have many scholars here in Berlin altogether, but there are a few things you should, or at least I learned from all these things. For institutions, the colleagues who are working in the administration, if you are in such a situation as we are, try to avoid overreaching. If you pile on programs and although you always hire new people, someday your resource will just not be enough, and then you can't do your work really properly. And of course, the most important thing is in our work, I think, to really take care of the scholars and to give them the best environment which is possible to enable them to get back on their academic careers or find other options maybe. But this takes a lot of time and effort. And so if you have too many of these programs, because of course, once you are successful with a program, others will follow automatically. And this goes to the point when you really can't handle the whole thing anymore. So this is, I think, quite important to bear this in mind. And speaking to the scholars, which are also quite numerous here today, I think it's very important for you to make the most of the stay you have at a university. And the key to this is your host, your academic host. We had very, very good successes with people who were working very closely with their professor who was hosting them, because they also had often a very close personal relationship, and they supported the guests' development within the working group, trying to find other funding opportunities. So this is basically in all this work and in these various programs we have now the important thing, the paramount thing, that host and guest fit together very well. Otherwise, it's just a way to get money for 1, 2, 3 years, but it won't really help you on. For the administrators, again, one important thing, if you can, maintain your own funds as well, because sometimes if third-party funds, they can create some problems. There was in all the hubbub in 2015-16 when there were different fundings, sometimes excluding each other. Then we just stepped in with our own funds and then refinanced the whole thing afterwards. So it's always good to have something on the side. And it's also very good in this process to create a council at your university, preferably with a vice president, international or something, which is sort of taking responsibility also for hiring scholars, because there's also questions, why wasn't I hired, why my colleague, or so. Then you can always say, well, we had a council, Scholars at Risk Council, we call it here, which made this decision. There are professors in the council, there are administrators. So when we decide whom we take on, it's always a sound decision. And finally, for the scholars, a few more words of advice I have during the many years I'm in this job now. Apart from finding a good host and cooperating, also if you try for funding opportunities, it's not a good idea to write to the international office. You should rather seek a host which is working in your field and try to get in contact with him or her in order to establish this relationship first, and the host will just talk to the administration here and look for funding for you. You should try definitely to master the local language, be it Norwegian or German, apart from English, which is still very important. English, of course, is a lingua franca, but it's always important to also speak the language of the country rather well. Also, you should think of leaving this system of STAR as soon as possible, is my experience. The longer you stay in that one application and one funding, and then the next one it's 2 years, 3 years, and someday you're just too long in the system to have any chance of that. And so don't exclude a career change as well. This is something everybody has to face, even Germans or other Europeans who are educated in the whole system. Many want to become professors, but at some time they will maybe find that just doesn't work out with 40 or 45 even, and then they have to make a choice to do something else. So this is something which is sadly true, but you should bear it in mind. And I think that's enough for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stefan. I think you had a lot of good advice at the end there for the researchers that risk themselves when they're looking for opportunities. And it's very interesting to hear about your experiences. And now we will hear from Sofia Klingberg. And this is, I think, very relevant to what you said at the end. Exactly how can we look for other opportunities as well that researchers at risk doesn't only need to look inside universities. It should also be possible to look for relevant positions in private companies and other organizations. And the Afroy company has some experience with taking in academics, not necessarily researchers in a company. And we should hear about this experience. Please, yes. Sofia.
I'm just start by saying I'm really happy to be part of this presentation today. You can take next slide. Just going to go through. So my name is Sofia Klingberg and I work at AFRY, which is an international consultant company. You can take the next slide. And this is just a summary what I will talk about today. So I work within corporate HR, and we have this Immigrated Engineers program that we have had for 4 years, and that's what I'm going to present for you today. And then I'm going to show you some statistics and talk about profitability, because that's why we're actually working with this. So you can take the next slide. This is a little bit about AFRY. It's the former ÅF and Pöyry, which is two international consultant engineering companies, and we are based all over in many parts of the world. But I would say we're biggest in Sweden. We have 10,000 employees in Sweden, but 17,000 in total, and we are based in 50 countries. You can take the next slide. And this is just a little bit about us. It's all about making sustainable solutions for generations to come. And you can take the next slide. And we're actually based in all markets. Within infrastructure, everything within industrial digital solution, energy, process industry, consultant management. So it's basically everything within engineering, designers, and we also have lots of people within sustainability, environment, and yeah, so a lot of different competences in AFRY. You can take the next one. And what is the Immigrated Engineers program? It's actually great, thank you. This slide is a very important slide I want to show you. This is in Sweden though. It's the supply and demand for engineers until 2030. And for us in Sweden, it's very hard to find the right competence. And during the refugee crisis in 2015, we had approximately 165,000 refugees coming to Sweden only between I think it was October until November in 2015, and almost about like 25% of them were academics. So we wanted to start this program to find competence within all these new Swedish citizens that were actually coming to Sweden. So therefore we were starting this program to meet the people and to find employees. You can take the next slide. because the most important thing at AFRY as a consultant company are our employees. That's like the only thing that we have. And we have people from all over the world. And as I mentioned, we are based in 50 different countries. But like me, I'm suited in Gothenburg in Sweden. So like out of a Swedish perspective, there's so many people from especially Syria that have started in our organization for the last 4 years. And those are our best employees. And out of an HR perspective, retention of the employees is the most important question. And we want to keep the competence within the organization, and we want to attract the right competence for us so that we can grow in our sustainable solutions. You can take the next slide. And then next again. So what do we actually do? Yes, we work as diversity coaches. So we actually coach immigrated talents. So it's me and another colleague, Amir is his name. So we're two full-time employees having contact with so many different immigrated talents that we try to coach. And now when we merged with Pöyry, OF and Pöyry, and created AFRY, I actually have contact with a lot of, potential employees all over in the world, actually, especially a lot of it in Europe, but also trying to help HR in different parts of AFRY in the world to find the right competence. So we match the competence to the relevant manager, and we have an individual perspective on each candidate. You can take the next slide, the next. And it's all about lots of administration. And it's all this individual perspective on each candidate, because I will tell you more about what kind of support you can get from the Swedish government, because they actually can offer like internship and support when you, like in terms of employment, that you get money from the government to give these talents a job in Sweden. But for us, it's the most important is to actually to understand the competence that the individual possesses. So we understand what she or he can do, and then we try to match the competence to the right manager. And to help these individuals to actually to understand that we are a consultant company, you need to understand what kind of assignments do we have, what kind of clients do we have, and how can you use your competence into our organization. And so we have lots of internship programs, and we also help the candidate or the new employee with the tax agency, opening bank account, and all of that. And the next, if you click on the next, because I would say what's very important in Sweden, that we have a really good connection and relationship with the Swedish migration agency, because we are searching competence all over the world. Like I showed you this picture of the, this demand and supply for engineers. We can't find the right competence today. So we are constantly trying to, like today, a manager contacted me from Stockholm office and said, okay, there's this person in this African country. We want to give an employment, even if it's a Corona crisis. It doesn't matter. Like we're still having hard to find the right competence in Sweden. And for us, employments often, if we get them employment, then they get a work permit in Sweden and they can work in Sweden. And as I said, we are certified at the Swedish Migration Agency, which means that we get a work permit in 10 work days instead of 18 months. So it's a fast track that we have with the Swedish Migration Agency. And I can call them every day to ask about potential employees and what we have to do in a certain matter. So we have great relationships with the Swedish Migration Agency. And of course, this leads to an inclusive organization, proudness, happiness and development. And this is very important. As I mentioned, retention of the employees is the most important for us. You can click on the next one. And the next one, yes. So 279 immigrated engineers have started to work in, this is in Sweden, no? For the last 4 years. And almost all of them are still in the organization. and they are now permanent or have employment at AFRY. And of course, now due to the Corona crisis, it's harder for us to find new competence, but we're still struggling, and we hope that we can get at least 40 candidates until the end of this year. You can take the next slide. And this, I just want to mention some short about how to change an organization to be more inclusive and how to increase diversity, because you have to have it, like it must mean something, and you have to really work with these issues. So we have the code of conduct, we have all these policies, we have an inclusive recruitment guide to help managers to be more inclusive when they recruit employees. And of course, sustainability and all of that is very important. But the most important thing that we have, if you click on the next one, is our brave leadership criteria. I just want to show you this slide. This is how we change our leaders to become more inclusive and also to become more, to strive for diversity in the organization. So all leaders must follow this, and also all our employees. And this we follow up in our employment services. Evaluations. So when we have evaluations, we follow up and we can give feedback to the managers. Next one. Yes, so that was a short presentation of what we do at AFRY. So just a summary, it's all about finding the right people. It's about changing the leaders so that they see profitability, and then of course to find the best employees. And of course many of our employees are researchers, but not like the most important thing for us is to understand what they can do for us in our organization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sofia. Now we have some minutes for questions and answers. We have received some questions during the presentations, and I will try to take up some of them. As I mentioned, not all of them will be responded to orally, but we will answer also later on in the writing. To get back to the last presentation, we have had a couple of questions about how can someone, or what should you do, what should you provide in order to be attractive to a private company. This could be relevant both for universities wanting to help a researcher to look outside academia, and also some of the researchers are asking themselves.
I think it's very important to, to sell yourself, to actually, to let organizations know what you know of, like what is your competence. You must have a LinkedIn profile. I know this is really corny, but it's actually very important. All private companies are searching and hunting for competence at LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is very important, but also to know that you have to be active, networking, contacting, mentorship, all of that. I mean, I know you're all based in different countries. In Sweden, we have lots of mentorship programs that are, free for the adepts to attend, but also to really work actively on your network and to also make some research about the organizations that you're interested in. If there are consultant companies, you have to understand what kind of clients do they have. Are they working with the municipalities? Then the language might be very important, like the native language. So, and that is what I'm helping everyone that are new in Sweden. But this works in all countries. So be active, work with networking, and try to have people have to get to know you as a person, not as a printed name on a piece of paper.
That's true, and I think what you're saying, that you really have to look for what the other is looking for in you, is a good advice. We have had a couple of questions about the COVID-19 pandemic and how this can influence funding for researchers at risk. And I think at the time we don't really know exactly what will be the situation, because we see borders are closing, which make it more difficult to move from one country to another. this might loosen up in months to come, but we also see that there are things when it comes to funding, that universities get less funding, for example, from student fees, so they get less funding, but at the same time, many governments are putting in more money for research, which I think Stefan mentioned, which might also give more opportunities for researchers at risk. So I think this is really something we have to look into over the next months. We had some questions connecting to Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions when it comes to the application process. One was about the timing of an application, because if you're in Europe already with a fellowship and you want to apply for Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, should you try to do it as soon as possible, or is it better to wait and things like that? Would you like to say anything about that, Terence? Otherwise, I know also in the other webinar we had, this was a topic.
Yeah, I think because it takes quite a long time to put together a bid, they're quite complex, and because you have to have it at a partner institution, you know, the sooner you start, the better. It may take you time to find a partner institution that is interested in the topics you wish to research, and also has the facilities for hosting you as a scholar. So the sooner you start to do that, the better. And you will then have to work with the host institution, because they will have to provide a fair amount of information in relation to the actual application itself. And it is also the case that the institution will manage the grant during the duration of the project. So the sooner you start, the better chance you have of putting together a bid that is coherent and stands a good chance of getting funding.
Thank you so much. I think it's also very important to read carefully the application regulations, because some of the calls have some specific rules when it comes to how long you have been living in different places. I want to ask a question maybe to Stefan and Karen about how universities can assist the researchers when they have been with your institution for a while and they are searching for what they can do next, and you know how to fund their next position. I don't know if one of you could answer a bit to that.
Do I start?
Yep.
You know, we try, this is sometimes at least the beauty of being in a network, you know, because both Scholars at Risk, the headquarters in New York, will be of assistance. You know, every scholar has a contact person there, and they will try to look for the way ahead. Like this year, because of the corona, we have been trying to find continued placements for our scholars already in Norway to continue to be in Norway, and also in some instances Sweden, Denmark, you know, to think about the Nordic countries, because it makes it easier crossing borders. But most of the time we find a placement. Sometimes the only solution the actual scholar sees is to seek for asylum. Sometimes they find employment at universities or outside of universities, and sometimes they return home because things have changed. Most of the time we will be able to find a new placement for them.
Okay, thank you. And Stefan, would you like to add something?
Yes, well, in our case, I mentioned it, we have lots of funding opportunities. So a sort of typical career would be to start with a Scholars at Risk or Scholar Rescue Fund scholarship for 1 or 2 years, then maybe apply for a PSI fellowship, which is 2 to 3 years. And then again, this importance of the host and guest connection. Then very often in several cases, we've had a professor who was then arranging for another, like Knudsen or something, of the sort of Scholars at Risk grants for another 2 or 3 years. And so in one case, for example, of a Syrian scholar who was already in his late 50s when he came. So somehow they managed to sort of drag it on until he finally reaches retirement at 65. So this is basically something you can do for a certain period of time, 5 years, 8 years, maybe the most, but sometimes in the end it's just finished. And so it's better to, what I said before, to get out of this at-risk circle. For example, Gerda Henkel Stipendium grant is for everybody, every researcher, and if you're out of that, then you sort of gain more credibility as a researcher as well. So this is the way we try to do it here at the university.
Thank you very much. Actually, we will have also at the Inspire Europe Stakeholder Forum in a few weeks, we will also have a workshop on mentoring researchers at risk. And I think there we will also come back to some of the things that can be very smart to do when preparing for a new placement. There is one question for Sophia, which is, do you have any advice for other private companies and organizations looking to establish a diversity program? How could they start this kind of program?
Well, I think, is this, doesn't matter which country it is, like it could be any like European country, or, because I think, as I said before, it's all about finding, I don't know how other companies have it, but for us, it's really hard to find the right competence. And that perspective you have to have as an organization, and also focusing on, you know, to find the right competence and to keep the employees, the retention of the employees. So I would say, for us, for example, we earn the most money in the groups where we have the most diversity, where we have like 18 nationalities or lots of people from different backgrounds. Or so for us, diversity is all about, you know, profitability and to make a great organization. So that we really want to, you know, inspire other organizations with. So how to start that? I think it's important, like, just to acknowledge the fact that if you're seeking for competence, try to open the door, try to have like, you know, to meet the people, to have like, for example, like meet and greet, where people can come in and to meet the organization if it's hard to, you know, to get to know them. So to be more open, to be more inclusive, and it's quite easy actually to start doing this. It's just be curious and try to meet the new people in your country and see what kind of competence they have and how you can, you know, how they can contribute into their organization. That was a long answer, but
thank you very much. I think also you mentioned to me earlier that as a company you have a very long perspective when it comes to taking in people with diverse backgrounds, but also that in the start it can be good to cooperate with public organizations that have maybe some measures in place. That's good. We have one question. Yeah, you want to add something?
Yeah,
please.
I just want to say that the most important thing, like, it doesn't matter, like, when you meet the people, regardless if they're refugees or whatever, it's meet them equally. Like, it's to have this, you know, this is a person it's equal to anyone in the world. Just to meet the person with respect and to understand what knowledge does this person have, and don't see them as a problem or something that do you understand? That it's very important to have this, to be fair and to be.
Yeah. That's true. We're nearing to the end of the webinar. There was one question that I don't know if any of you would like to try to answer. There was a question about how can we assist researchers at risk who are not able to leave their home country. It could be because they have got confiscated their passports, or there are other limits to travel. Anyone who has a input on this one?
We had a program at Humboldt University, and there's a so-called Off University, which is also based in Berlin, which tries to address exactly this clientele, because many Turkish scholars are still in their home country and cannot get out, and so they are sort of invited to e-teach. That was before Corona already, and they get some sort of remuneration for that. But I don't know what's the current status of this project.
Maybe the Corona situation is actually helpful in this area, because more and more universities are now getting more adjusted to online and distance teaching. So maybe this can be better opportunities for that kind of support. Now I think we need to round off the Q&A, and I can have the last two slides. So this one is just to share with you that in 2 weeks' time, Monday, June 8th, we will have the Inspire Europe Stakeholder Forum, which will be a large online event. It will have plenaries in the morning, and then there will be workshops in the afternoon. One of the workshops will be on mentoring researchers at risk. It will be focusing more on the academic mentoring, but also on things that we have been discussing today about finding new opportunities after one stay, and like what should you emphasize when preparing for what happens after. And the registration is open now and until just before the event. So I join the Stakeholder Forum. And then, of course, we always want to have your comments and suggestions. So if you have ideas for webinar topics, questions, or comments, please answer the survey that you will receive afterwards. There you can put in your ideas, and you can also contact us by email, as you see here, and use our Twitter account. And then I would like to thank you all the panelists for contributing, and all the active participants in the webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.